And our presenter is Mr. Robert McKee, who is the principal at McKee Carson and Field Sports Concepts. And he's going to talk some about give some case studies of their work, examples of how private individuals are leveraging government programs, investing their own dollars to do habitat restoration and conservation, and actually creating jobs in the process. So it's a series of success stories and the sort of things that we hope to see scaled up around Virginia. So thank you very much, Robert.
For that intro, I would like to get started, if I could, by telling you a little bit about our company, Field Sport Concepts. Not to dwell on it, but I'm here, I might as well still get a look at what we do. Field Sport Concepts was founded in 1993 as a way to provide alternative means, alternative solutions to the preservation of rural land. In my business, which is a consulting engineering, landscape architecture, land planning firm, we noticed at that time quite a few folks that had large land holdings, private individuals that did not want to develop their property in a more traditional way with subdivisions, curb and gutter, that sort of thing, with a lot of infrastructure. But they were interested in preserving their land. They wanted to keep their land, but they also needed to have some source of income. And so we were thinking about it, and we thought, well, you know, if you have an equestrian center, you could make money doing that. You could probably do the same if you had a trout stream and you wanted to, you know, put a fishing venue on your property. Same with hunting, same with falconry, same with dog trials, same with almost anything outdoors that you could draw people to that would generate income. And that's really how we started the project, the firm, the company. It's actually an affiliation of folks all around the country. I'll be brief about that. We have Trout Headwaters out of Livingston, Montana. They do a lot of our stream and river restoration work. We have an equestrian architect in Washington, D.C., John Blackburn, who does a lot of our equestrian design, particularly barns and stables. We have a sporting clays course designer in Georgia, John Higgins. And we have a fellow in Chicago, Jay Trudy, who has a company called Ecosystem Capital, LLC. And then McKee Carson is the land planning component of the affiliation. So that's essentially how Field Sport works. We draw upon each other's core competencies as needed. But anyway, today I'd like to talk a little bit about what we do. And this is sustainability. I think sustainability, sustainable conservation really has three components as far as we're concerned. It has the economic component. It's got to make sense economically. It has an ecological component, obviously. But it also has an enjoyment factor. The idea of being outside, enjoying nature, whether that be passive or active recreation, shooting, hunting, fishing, walking your dog, bird watching, hiking, whatever that might be. So there's those components that we think are important. But one thing that we all know, or not all of us perhaps, I suppose there's a few folks that don't need this, but they do need economic incentives to do this. They can't do it on their own or without some sort of income producing activity. Funding is absolutely critical. That can come from either public or private sources. And I'm going to touch a little bit on the public source before I get into the private sector, if that's okay. I hope I get this right. The public sources, you probably are familiar with these. I won't dwell on it too much, but we have the Conservation Reserve Program, CRP, which is a federal program, the Conservation Enhancement Program, the CREP program, which is a state-based program in partnership with the Fed, primarily dealing with water quality in those areas adjacent to or part of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the Texas Wildlife Management Program, tax exemption, which I think we don't have that in Virginia, but I think it might be worth considering at some point. As I said, the CRP program, it's a program which is you're bound by contract 10 to 15 years. It's not a permanent easement like a conservation easement. The landowner has that ability to opt out after the meantime, one has to maintain that. And the Fed will provide up to 50% of the installation costs for approved practices and an additional $5 per acre per year to perform maintenance on that. And there's also an annual payment depending on the productivity of the land. And they measure that productivity primarily by the comparables or other agricultural land adjacent to it or within that region. In order to qualify, the land needs to be in agricultural use, cash crops, for at least the past 4 to 6 years in order to qualify for this program. The Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, or CREP, this acronym, is similar. It helps. As I say, it's a kind of a partner program with the state of Virginia. Every state, or maybe not every state, but most states have it, or one like it. In Virginia, the emphasis has been put on those lands that are within or adjacent to the Chesapeake Bay or other water bodies. Like the CRP program, it is a limited contract of 10 to 15 years. It's not a permanent easement, which gives the landowner that opportunity to bail out or opt out in the event they don't want to continue that and do something else possibly with their land. The incentives here are $100 an acre as an incentive, $100 per acre for an incentive just to get you involved in the program. There's an additional 25% of funding for the cost of establishing this type of habitat. And then there's also a one-time payment of 40% if you create riparian buffers and filter strips along waterways. And then another annual payment of up to $100 per acre to maintain. So as you can see, there's pretty good resources out there. But frankly, you know, the CRP and the CREP program are not always suitable for, they don't provide the total amount of cash that one might need to do this. But before I get into that, I'd like to talk a little bit about the Texas Wildlife Management Tax Exemption. This has to do with, essentially they treat wildlife habitat, farms, lands that have wildlife management programs as they are agricultural land. If you're familiar, in Virginia they have ag forestal districts where you get tax breaks. As a result, well, in Texas they also allow that for wildlife management, solely wildlife management. The difference in the CREP and the CRP program is that the Texas law promotes the management of wildlife, whereas the other two promote water quality and habitat restoration with the ancillary benefit of perhaps improving wildlife or increasing the populations. In order to qualify for this program, one has to comply with at least 3 of the 7 criteria that I've listed here. Either habitat control or predator control or water or shelter, erosion control, and they also have census counts on a yearly basis that are monitored by the state. Virginia has a deer management program, but that program is really to control the populations and not enhance them or cause them to grow. These public funding sources, while they're very generous, are not always adequate to meet the private landowner's needs, depending on what that private landowner would like to do. So I think it's critical that the landowners be aware of other opportunities that can create income-generating conservation and, in our case, field sport venues. So I'd like to look a little at some of the private sources. And first of all, I'd like to pose this question. I don't think we have a law that does that like in Texas, but it might be worth contemplating at some point. The private sources of income are just that. There's fishing, for example, generates enormous fiscal impact in the state, about $1.3 billion per year. And this is, you know, a variety of things. It's the sale of licenses, it's the sale of fishing equipment, it's the rental of, or the entry fees for private sector streams and other fishing venues, those individuals that stock their own stocking, or they pay. It's also, part of the B&Bs or the lodging that they might provide. You add all those things up, and there's a total impact of about, and then taxes and all of that, about $1.3 billion. And the same thing goes with hunting. A little bit more, maybe $1.4 billion, for the same reasons that I just mentioned for fishing. I'd like to talk a little bit about a private sector initiative. It's actually in Cambridge, Maryland. I hope that not a problem. It's pretty close. It's the Triple Chance Farm. This was a property that was intended to be an outdoor paradise for folks. The variety of uses, outdoor recreation and that sort of thing. It was initiated by the owner of this property here. And you can see in 1957 it was purchased primarily from goose and duck hunting. And as you can see, it's pretty barren. There's not a lot of diversity in landscape or vegetation or terrain or water. There's some water on the property. The rest of that water, by the way, is salt water. So that's what it was for. And in 1975, the owner died, and his son, Robert McDonald, inherited it in 1975, and didn't quite know what to do with it at the time, but decided that, well, I know I can't really make it with cash crops. I just can't do that. That's not going to fly. Agriculture in itself, on 92 acres, just isn't going to get it. And I need to increase the habitat on this property. I'd like to develop habitat where I can have quail, native quail, woodcock, turkey, and songbirds, just for the general enjoyment of the farm. So you can see what it looks like in 2007. And to do that, he instigated these types of things on this property. And I don't need to read these to you. You can read them, I think. If anybody can't, raise their hand and I will. But the important thing here is to integrate these facilities so that it's an integrated mix of landscape and vegetation, not only to provide food, but to provide travel corridors, wildlife corridors, for particularly the birds, for protection. So that's one brief case study. I have more information on this if anybody would like to really delve into it. I might also add that he sold this property in 2009, which, as we all know, was not a very good year for real estate. He sold it for well in excess of $2 million for a 92-acre farm, which isn't too shabby, particularly in that year. He had 5 bidders on the property as a result of his improving that improving the habitat. Bottom line is, habitat is marketable. It can be marketable. I'd like to quickly talk about another case study. This is probably doesn't look like fishing or hunting, but this is in North Carolina. But that doesn't offend anyone. But, it's called the Fork Farm and Stables. This is a project that we actually worked on some years ago. It's a piece of property of about at the time it was about 1,100 acres. It's since been increased to about 1,600 acres. It was purchased by an individual who wanted to have his own private retreat, I guess you could call it. Well, over the years, it's morphed into more than that. He actually has developed a world-class equestrian facility on this. This is they had the last Olympic trials here, U.S. trials for the 3-day eventing. You can see by the barns, it's a pretty fancy place. And he did all of this on his own. This is a private initiative. He also created quail habitat, and he created fishing. Well, he didn't create it. Fishing was already there. It's at the fork, and they call it the fork because it's at the confluence of 2 rivers, the Petey and the Rocky River. It's about 1 hour east of Charlotte. And when he bought it, it was a farm. It was being an ag farm for primarily cotton. It was being leased, and so when he purchased the property, he wanted to maintain the agricultural component. So he agreed with the farmer that he would allow that farmer to continue to farm it at no cost. He didn't lease it. He just let him farm it with one condition. for fee type of place. It's now become, you pay money to go there to hunt quail. You pay money to enjoy the equestrian component or the sporting place courses that he has. There's two of them which were designed by one of our affiliates, John Higgins, in South Georgia. And occasionally he'll bring falconry in as an exhibit, which is pretty exciting. If any of you have ever done that, you probably know what I'm talking about. Those birds of prey are pretty special. If you haven't done it, I would encourage you to at least give it a shot. So this is a case study that we're pretty proud of. It's been, we did this in the early 2000s, so it's completed now. So I'll leave it at that. And again, this is available, more information is available about this if you're interested. But let's face it, not hunting, fishing, and those sorts of things are for everyone. They, you may not want to manage a rural recreation facility. You just may not want to do it, even though it might produce income. You may want to consider something else. You may want to consider ecosystem services, monetizing these. I know there's quite a few of you probably that are familiar with this. It is a way that one can generate income on their property, private sector. It's a market-based program, or programs I should say. And it's either aquatic or land-based, water or land-based. And these are some of the benefits. Probably don't need to tell you about this. Carbon sequestration, regulated climate, prevention of soil erosion, and recreation, just being a few. These are services that are provided by natural systems, and they can be marketed. Credits for them can be sold. They can be banked and sold to individuals that need them to mitigate damage that they have done to their properties for a variety of reasons, such as the typical land developer, the transportation folks that put highways in, utility companies, and industry. All usually need some sort of credits for whatever. Let's see, I think I missed something here. Oh, I guess I did. I'm going to talk a little bit about the land base. This is a Virginia case study. Some of you I know are familiar with this. It's in Southwest Virginia. This was a group of about, I don't know how many folks, but they were small landowners that collectively had about 2,500 acres. Forest, they banded together to form a co-op so that they could compete with the larger forestry industries that are down in that region of the state. And they are becoming FSC certified for the wood products. I think they already are, in fact, for their sustainable timber work harvest. The benefits of this go beyond that, of course. I mean, they're bringing income in, they're increasing the economic well-being of the community, and they're doing better as a cooperative than they would be individually. Wildlife protection is an offshoot of what they're doing as a riparian habitat restoration and preservation. And when I looked into this, they were investigating, they may be doing it now, the idea of carbon credits, selling carbon credits. Whether they've gotten that far or not, I do not know. Maybe some of you do. If you do, let me know. Forestry is pretty important, as we all know. It obviously can generate value in the land through the sale of timber, but also through recreation and ecosystem services. Virginia forests provide over $900 million in air pollution abatement each year. Not all of this is in form of credits that are sold or banked, but this is the estimated value of the pollution abatement called by forest in the state. This is from the Virginia Department of Forestry. It's determined through a fairly sophisticated scientific process, which I won't even attempt to get into today, because I don't understand it, frankly. We also have water-based ecosystem services, which provide for water purification. Some of this has been touched on earlier by Leslie. It's a food source for a lot of people and a lot of animals. It also captures nutrients, the nutrients that Leslie spoke of, TMLs that are becoming pretty important, pretty significant these days. wetland stays there. It stays in the bottom, but essentially long-term it becomes part of the bedrock. So in a way, it's a lot more efficient than timber from that perspective. I want to talk about that with this case study. This is one also in Virginia. You may be familiar with it. This is a private sector initiative. Ecosystem Investment Partners is a group based out of Baltimore. They teamed with a company called Lime Timber to buy this land. It's about 1,000 acres of land adjacent to, actually surrounded by, the Dismal Swamp, which is a national park, or preserve, I should say. And it was privately held. They were able to acquire it and ultimately turn it into a wetland bank and some other things, which I'm going to dwell on and talk about just a little bit here. But I'll give you a little history behind this if you don't know. This is and you can't just go buy existing wetlands for your wetland bank. You have to create them, you have to engineer them, you have to develop them, new ones, not old ones. Obviously, this was a wetland a long, long time ago, but George Washington, our first president, saw this property and literally called it, boy, that land is dismal, we got to do something about it. So he drained it. He turned it into agricultural land with a series of canals and drainage ditches and the engineering techniques that they used at that time. So it was effectively agricultural land. Well, these folks saw the benefit or the potential of that, so they purchased it. And they engineered the wetlands by regrading terrain to get the terrain suitable for that habitat. Also for drainage. Well, they turned it into a wetland again, the way it used to be 300 years ago. And I don't know if you were aware of these numbers, but I found them pretty astounding. I'm aware of the $150,000 per acre price tag on certain wetlands, particularly in those areas where there's heavy development, in Northern Virginia, for example, or tidewater. But this figure came out, I couldn't believe it, really. $653,000 has been paid for 1 acre of tidal wetlands. That's a lot of money for a 1 acre of land. So you can see that why this might be market driven, why one or why a group or why a private sector company might want to be involved with wetland mitigation. I think this is a good example of the fact that environmental protection and restoration can be compatible with economic development and a return to their investors, to the investors. They planted over close to 300,000 native trees and shrubs. And as you can see, they have some other sources of income. I don't need to read them to you. There they are. Farm tools for restoration, recreation, releasing for farming, hunting. But this was interesting. Biodiversity credits for the canebrake rattlesnake. I got to be honest with you, I'd never heard of a canebrake rattlesnake. I thought Virginia had maybe two or three poisonous snakes altogether, and that was not one of them. But I guess we have another one now. And they have habitat on there of about, I think it's around 217 acres. It's the little tract, you can see the kind of the yellow dashed area on that block of land. That's the canebrake rattlesnake conservation bank. And we'll get to that in just a second. This is the market for wetland in 2007. The wetland mitigation market was close to $3 billion nationally. That number has probably come down a little bit given the economics we've had over the past 3 years, but the source for this is the Conservation Fund. Conservation banking is another up-and-coming ecosystem service, I should say the habitat for that. As I just mentioned, the canebrake rattlesnake. It's really a program that was developed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Endangered Species Program, which allows, in much the same way, other mitigation, carbon, wetlands, those sorts of things work, but it's for species, biodiversity. If someone's a developer and they run across the spiny mussel, I believe Leslie mentioned that was a big deal in Albemarle County for a long time. Maybe you can tell us later how that was ever resolved. I don't even remember now, it's been going on for so long. But in order to have built that project, if they did, they would have had to find other habitat for that species. move those species or have a habitat that is suitable for the propagation of those species, or both. But in any case, it's a market-based approach. Now, when I say market-based approach, that's not to say that some of these programs don't need to have government permitting and that sort of thing. Of course they do, but by and large, they are private sector initiated approaches to conservation and economic development. This is an astounding number here. Ecosystem Markets is the source of this data. Global biodiversity markets, over $3 billion in 2010. Now I'm going to talk about something which I hope doesn't offend anyone. But residential development can actually coexist with habitat preservation and the working landscape. We're not talking now about curb and gutter types of subdivisions or shopping centers or that kind of thing. We're talking about conservation communities, which conservation communities by definition are designed in harmony with the landscape and the ecology. They're to preserve the wildlife. The residents typically lay gently on the land, as does all the infrastructure, the roads and everything. We use low impact development strategies in designing these things and other best management practices. But the programming elements can include farming, agriculture, they can include forestry, they can include the types of field sport activities that I mentioned, and they can include ecosystem services. They can include all of these things along with the residential development. This quote will give you a little idea of what some of the benefits might be. This is a quote from a book called Conservation Communities, written by Ed McMahon. Mike McMahon. No, Ed McMahon, I guess it is. Mike McMahon, it actually is Ed. No, it isn't Ed. I don't know what it is, but it's Mr. McMahon.
No, it is Ed.
Thank you. I'm saying the guy on TV.
Yeah. No, it's the same name, but this
Yeah.
is the man who did all the, you build in preserving character, what sense of place, all that.
Mhm.
That's who that is.
Well, thank you. I had Mike written here and Ed. So, anyway, he wrote a good book. It came out last year called Conservation Communities, published by the Urban Land Institute. If anybody wants to dig into that a little bit for a little more information, it has quite a few case studies in it, which you might find of interest. But I'm going to talk about one that we worked on in Albemarle County, Bundoran Farm, which is a 2,300 acre piece of land, still is. It was a working farm, it still is. It had a forestry component, which it still does, and it had an orchard operation, which still exists. There are 102 residential sites on the property. The by right number was around 165. But we actually located the residential sites using GPS in the field, as opposed to what I would call a paper plan or a plan prepared in the office using topographic mapping and that sort of thing. So the house sites were very sensitively located in order to preserve that rural character. Bundoran Farm property is really divided by a rural road. This is Route 29 South, approaching Nelson County, by Plank Road, which takes you to a little town off of 29 called Batesville. And it's a very picturesque road, and it's beautiful, beautiful land. And so one had to be pretty careful with how they did that. We were able to get every single adjoining landowner to support this project when they knew what we were doing. I could talk about this for hours, and I won't, but we're pretty proud of this project, actually. It has no curb and gutter. It has narrow roads. We were able to get permission to put private roads in, which is usually not that easy in Albemarle County. We were able to, which allow you to tighten the radii on roads to fit the terrain better, and also go steeper on the alignment or vertical alignments. So you can save on earthwork, and it's a lot less intrusive on the landscape. We have grass swales instead of curb and gutter. We put in low impact development strategies, whereby, for example, instead of a trap. We could later convert that trap into a rain garden rather than filling it in and ignoring it. And the whole pipe to pond process for stormwater was not used in this project. And I might just add on, we saved $700,000 just on the cost of roads by getting the private road ordinance, the permit to do private roads. We broke a lot of rules, but we were able to get it approved unanimously within about 20 minutes of the Albemarle County Planning Commission, which is an incredible feat. I thought we were going to get blown out of the water because the staff report was this thick recommending denial. When we explained what we were doing to the commission, one of the commissioners stood up and said, you know, if we approve this, it's going to set a new precedent. And another guy says, well, you know, maybe we need a new precedent. And bingo, they approved it like that. 20 minutes. I think it was 20 minutes, maybe 25. But anyway, it was quick, and what it does is it maintains all that. And another interesting thing about this, there's no common open area on Von Duren Farm. It's all fee simple ownership. Every square inch is owned by or will be owned by an individual family. There's a new vineyard going in there now, which took a couple of the residential lots to do that. Called Pippin Hill Farm, I believe it is. And so the way it works is that instead of having a common area where everyone can gather or go to, it has what we call cross easements, which allow people to cross other folks' property. The lots range in size from 2 acres to 150 acres. And you know, if I live on a 2-acre lot, believe it or not, I can go anywhere I want to on that property, as long as I don't intrude upon the private zone of each residence. Each residence site, the house site, were predetermined, as were a lot of other guidelines, both architectural and landscape architecture guidelines for this project. But that makes it kind of unique. It was developed by Crow Preservation Development out of Vermont, New Hampshire, excuse me, in partnership with Celebration Associates, which is a big-time developer. They did the World Celebration in Florida, so this is really a new type of project for them. I don't know what else I can tell you about this. I can tell you more and more on it. I think I probably said enough. Yes, ma'am.
How about the cost of the site? What did they sell for?
They start at about $300,000 and go up to over $1 million. It's not cheap, but it's, you know, it's well, porcelain. I mean, that may not be the case these days, but those were the original prices.
When was that?
Ma'am?
When were the original prices? What, 2000?
Well, when they started the project's been going on now for maybe, we started it 6, 7 years ago maybe. It's been a long time. Time flies. I don't really remember when we started it. It's been, like a lot of things, it's been dragging a little bit the past few years. It did win some awards. This was an Audubon International Gold Signature Award for Conservation Communities. It also won, I'm told, the Audubon Signature Gold Award for the first farm in Virginia. I don't quite understand that, but that's what it did. So that pretty much concludes my presentation. I'll let you read this if you'd like. And this, by the way, is a picture of a project that we worked on the Jackson River, another conservation community that was based around fishing, trout fishing, obviously. And that's what was the draw here. Very few lots, but there was a combination of residential development and nature. It could be said that, and it has been said by quite a few people now, that the golf course community has been replaced by the agriculture community. People want to go, they want nature more than they want greens, golf greens. And that in itself is good. We don't have any fertilizers at Von Duren. We don't use herbicides or any of those sorts of things like they do on golf courses. And so it's good in a lot of ways, I think. So I'm open for questions if anyone has any. Yes, sir.
Is there like a homeowner's fee that maintains those roads?
There is. The roads are private, so that there has to be an association to do that, but not, there's no common area, so it doesn't.
But I assume they can't further subdivide, right?
No, they can't. This is a by right development. In other wasn't a rezoning or attached to it. The only special use permits that we needed were for slopes, steep slopes for the roads, private roads. No. Yes, ma'am.
You said Virginia has a deer management program, and we have lots of deer in our farm, we like when you've got to manage, and I've not heard of that, so what is it? The shootings.
I don't know all the specifics of that, but I'd be happy to find out for you and get you the details on that. My point was I just wanted to differentiate the two, the Virginia program and the Texas program, because Texas intentionally goes after wildlife management with that program. It gives you the same benefits that you get here in Virginia with an agricultural tax exemption, tax reduction. Yes, ma'am. I understand, and it's not for, fire ants are considered predators down there. Fire ants. If you're- Well, the idea is to protect the type of species or wildlife or whatever you're raising, the important thing, for example, deer or that's not good. I don't think the government does that. I don't think the government in Texas has the right to do that. Yeah, I think it's a private owner initiative to maintain and manage the wildlife on their property in a proper way. I'm not saying they go out and kill every four-legged creature, but there's certain predators that I don't know all the specifics, but the cowbird, I believe, is one. Cowbird, something like that, is one of the predators. It's not good. Obviously, we can't go shooting hawks and birds of prey, which could be considered, which are predators. But I can get you the specifics on that if you would like. Be happy to do that. Yes, sir.
You know, there's still carbon banks in the States on how much the price of carbon now?
There's several carbon banks. The one I mentioned, I know there's one up in, there's several companies that are doing this. Falling Springs LLC is one company that does it. There's quite a few others. I don't know. Yeah, there's more than one. There's quite a few. The price of them, as I indicated, can go up to $150,000 an acre, depending on where you are, what kind of wetlands you're disturbing, what carbon you're talking about.
I know for an acre forest, it's probably just a few dollars.
Well, that's a really, I'm sorry, I got off track on that. There's a lot of work done on that. It's a scientific basis to determine, the age of the tree, the type of tree, the area that you're talking about, the proximity to the area that needs to purchase carbon credits. All of those things enter into how much the carbon credit's worth.
Virginia Tech has done an aerial of all the forest land in the state. They can tell the carbon sequestration by the color of the forest.
They probably can. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was wondering, we know that a lot of Virginia's landowners are sort of aging out of their active agricultural years, and that we're seeing the first wave of a lot of land transfer across rural Virginia. Some of that was timber companies moving out, but a lot of it's going to be landowners actually aging out and then handing land on to their descendants or their heirs. In your experience, has that been oftentimes an occasion at which the new owners will look at the land management? Is that an opportunity? Is that a threat? Or is it...
In our experience, it's been a reason why people have come to us, families that have 3 or 4 heirs or siblings that might be inheriting the farm, and one wants to sell it, doesn't care about it, just wants to sell it and take the reward that way. One might want to try a development of some sort if it's appropriate in another one wants to keep it as a working farm, another one wants to turn it into a shooting preserve or a hunting preserve. I mean, there are any number of things. You know, rarely do you find a family where everyone agrees on what to do with their farm if it's in a situation like that. And we have had folks come to us that have that issue. Whether or not we can resolve it for them is another matter. But at least we can lay out the options. And typically what we'll do is we'll put a questionnaire out there to try to sense from those folks, you know, what the attributes of that land might be that they value, and what sorts of things that they might like to see in the future. And it's just, and probably a couple dozen questions along those lines, and just to try to get them all thinking and brainstorming, and hopefully they can come to some consensus.